Salam, Namaste, Adab, and welcome to today's event at Indian Diaspora, Washington Metro. Today we are going to have Mushaira City, mapping Delhi through cultures of poetry. Professor Nishat Zaidi, who is a professor and former head of Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, is the main speaker. She will be introduced. She, as well as the theme, probably will be introduced by Professor Nishat, who is also a former professor of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. And the concluding remarks will be given by Professor Farhat Nasreen from Jamia, professor and head of Department of History. Faisal, somebody is in the background. Which is
Anis bhai, aap kya se background noise aa rahi hai?
All right. So I invite Nishat, Professor Nishat for formal introduction.
Okay, may I start now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Adab, all the participants here. Friends, sometimes commonplace matters matter a lot. So let me begin with a commonplace, and that is, let me say that it's a kind of a stereotype to say that Mushaira is a cultural institution. Yes, of course it is. It has been a cultural institution for a long time. But here we are going to listen to someone who has talked about and written about this and is going to share her thoughts with us this evening on Mushaira and this trajectory, especially in a particular region of our country. Friends, poets are very well known for their desire to share their share. Whenever you write something, you always look for an audience. And that is how a shair is also known for his inquisitiveness to share his share with others. Mushairas must have had their origins in the poet's desire to share. And this must have gone from one-to-one correspondence to the mahfils, and mahfils finally taking shape into mushairas. That I understand must have been the trajectory of Mushaira from one-to-one correspondence to the mahfil, from mahfil to Mushaira. We all have in our minds the images of the Mushaira that is etched in our minds, which has been handed over to us by Mirza Faridullah Beg's most well-known book, and also the kind of representations that have come to us through that book, which I mean, you understand what I mean, Dilli Ki Aakhri Shama. But going beyond that, one must appreciate that in Mushaira, there has been a lot of difference that we have had in the past and what we have now. Mushairas then were associated with Shama and Sherwani, as you would know very clearly. They were also associated with Masnad and Gautakia. They were associated with Daad and Dahish. They were associated with Tanz and Tabriq. And they were associated with Zaban and Zaban Dani. They were also associated with the manners, that is the Nishast and the Barkhast. But as time passed on, things changed a lot, and then we don't have much of that. That is to say, the Shama has disappeared, Sherwani is scarce now, Masnad and Gautaki are not there to be seen anymore. And chairs have usurped the farsh. There's no farsh now. The Masnad and Gautaki lie discarded somewhere. So we don't have that. Daad comes, of course it does come, but it comes in the form of a fat purse that is presented to the poets. So the world has changed a lot. What the Mushairas used to be once upon a time are no longer the same, but we have continued with this kind of institution for all these years, for all these centuries, I would say, more than over a century or 2 centuries around that. Today, we have a clan of Mushaira poets, which is very different from those we have heard, and we have the images of those we have had. We have the image of Ghalib and his companions and the Mushaira of the Red Fort. So that was a different world that came about and that we have been acquainted with. A particular kind of ghazal is now being recited in Mushairas these days. There is a big departure from the Mushairas of the past. And earlier, they were Shukhan Sanas, Shair and Sukhan Shanas audience. But you have today Ada Shanas, Shair and Ada Shanas audience. That is the big difference that has come into being. I do not want to make any value judgments about what Mushaira has been and what Mushaira is today. But these are some of the facts that we have that we have been witness of through these years and through all these decades. Mushaira has been a very important platform for cultural interaction and cultural enrichment. One way of looking at Mushaira, personally, this is what I would like to look at Mushaira is this, that you can look at the Mushairas with respect to the 4 schools of Urdu poetry, that is Lucknow, Delhi, Rampur, and Azimabad. These have been the great centers of Mushaira in the northern India, especially. I understand references to that would be made by Sir Zaidi and also by some of the people who are there in the audience and know this institution pretty well. The Bistan, what you call is the Bistan. I also remember Mushaira for a few other reasons. That is one, very important for me is this, that it was in the Mushaira of Rampur and in that fair of Rampur that Dagh met his beloved and with whom he continued all his life, 70 years and plus. That is Munni by hijab. And Dagh developed a kind of fascination for her, and he developed into a love for her, long-lasting love for her. And they started sending and writing to each other. So they started their own kind of a mushaira. So when they parted, they made ahdo paiman unhone kiye ki I'll write letters to you and you write letters to me, and we shall exchange our work with each other. Therefore, Ghadagh says, Hazrat Alud wo nigahein hain aur Sharararud meri aahein hain. This is from a Masnavi that he wrote, and the Masnavi is known as Faryad-e-Dagh, and to which the reply comes instantly from hijab, Munni by hijab, aise baison se ji nahi milta, Dagh sa aadmi nahi. So this is very interesting institution that comes to us, and that is how we are introduced to the poets and the audiences. I'm extremely happy, and I would like to just share this, and on that I'll finish that. It is Mushaira that brought me and that gave me a chance to meet Hazrat Firaq Puri. We were students, BA students in the college, and I came to know that Firaq Sahib is passing through the city of Muzaffarpur and going to be present in a Mushaira. So some of my class fellows, we reached the station, we took a train, and then train comes from Allahabad. So we thought that maybe Firaq Sahib is here. So we started looking into the compartments and we spotted Firaq Sahib. And he was sitting there and he didn't know that he had to change the train. So we took him out from that and brought with him to our compartment. And we spent 5 long hours with him. It was a wonderful time that I often recall and remember with great love and great admiration for that person. So that is how Mushaira has stayed with me in my little town where I grew. We used to have Mushairas quite often. Until 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, we used to sit. No one had any wink of sleep. I would like to just hand it over to Professor Zaidi now, but Zaidi has been my colleague, very precious colleague for me. Just a few words about Professor Zaidi. She and I taught together in the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. She's my former colleague and the head of the department of the English department. She is a recipient of several prestigious grants and has conducted numerous collaborative projects also. She has authored, translated, and edited as many as 16 books. Some of her recent publications, I'm just naming a few, include Cosmopolitan Cultures and Oceanic Thought, Routledge 2023. This is our latest book, which came just this month, I understand, Nishat. And then Ocean as Method, Thinking with Maritime with Dilip Menon and others, Routledge 2022. Then Literary Cultures and Digital Humanities in India with Shopee, Routledge 2022. And a monograph on Agha Shahid Ali, published by Sahitya Academy in 2016. Day and Dastan with Alok Bhalla, Niyogi Books 2018. Between Birds, The Travels of Yusuf Khan Kampal-Posh, which is a very interesting book with Mushaira Hasan, and Voyages to Modernism, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, again with Mushaira Hasan 2011. She has also guest edited the issue of Manoa, and of course, the other one, which is the book review, all of us write there, and it is one platform from where we get to know about the new publications. So Chap Zaidi has been a contributor to that also. Professor Zaidi, it is my pleasure to be with you on this occasion, to be able to listen to you and to share your thoughts so that we can all be a part of this, getting together and moving ahead with this. Thanks a lot. Please carry on, Professor Zaidi.
Thank you so much, Anisa. First of all, I'd like to thank Razi Sahab for his kind invitation, for inviting me to share my work on this platform, which is such an interesting platform and where we have had opportunity to listen to such fascinating scholars. So thank you, Razi Sahab. It's really, very kind of you. I also would like to thank Anis Sahab. I really don't have words to thank him enough. He has been my senior, as he just mentioned, and I am always humbled by the love and generosity that he has always showered on me. Thank you so much, Anis Sahab. And I would also like to thank my very dear friend Farhat Nasreen for coming here to to do the summing up. Thank you so much, and I'd like to thank the audience as well. So with these words, I would like to move on to my talk, which I have titled Mushaira and the City, Mapping Delhi Through Cultures of Poetry. In my talk, I have tried to map the genealogy of the city of Delhi through by tracking shifting affective engagements with Urdu poetry in the context of, say, spatio-temporal changes, and I have used literary texts for the purpose. So I would start with these famous words of Mir, दिल्ली के न थे कूचे औराक़ मुसव्विर थे, जो शक्ल नजर आई, तस्वीर नजर आई. These are the words with which renowned 18th century Urdu poet Mir Taqi Mir, whom Francis Pritchett calls a chronicler of inner moods, feelings and susceptibilities, reminisced his beloved city, Delhi. Mir had spent his life in Shahjahanabad neighborhood of Kucha Chalan, Chandni Mahal and Maria Mahal until the repeated plunders of Ahmad Shah Abdali forced him to forsake the city. A few years later, Sheikh Ibrahim Zaw, the poet laureate in the court of Bahadur Shah Zafar, expressed his love for the city terrains in these words: हमने माना कि दक्कन में है बहुत कद्र सुकन, कौन जाए ज़ौक़ पर दिल्ली की गलियां. Zauq had spent his life in the elite neighborhoods of Kabuli Darwaza, but his grave was recovered by the Archaeological Survey of India in 1990s from a spot where municipal corporation had built lavatories. Yet another Delhi poet, the last Mughal king Bahadur Shah Zafar, mourned his separation from Delhi in these words: नहीं हाले दिल्ली सुनाने के काबिल, ये किस्सा है रोने रुनाने के काबिल, उजाड़े लुटेरों ने वो महल इसके, जो थे देखने और दिखाने के काबिल, न घर है न दर है, रहा एक जफर है, फ़क़त हाले दिल्ली सुनाने के काबिल. In all these examples that I have cited here, and many more similar ones that I have not, there runs one common thread, which is a close connection between Urdu poetry and the sensorium induced by the spatial setting in which this poetry was enunciated, the habitat and the habitus of Urdu poetry. The Urdu poet now not only maps spaces through his visual and oral engagements with the landscape of the walled city of Delhi, where Urdu language and Urdu poetry flourished in the 18th and the 19th centuries, but also records sensations associated with these concrete landscapes. The poetic voice and the space in which this voice is located thus come to share a complex metonymic relationship, demanding an effective engagement of the reader and the listener, not just with the poet, but also with the landscape. It is not surprising, therefore, that when Mirza Farhatullah Beg thought of preserving the memories of a dying world, he decided to do so by capturing the culture of Mushaira. Farhatullah Beg was born nearly 3 decades after the cataclysmic event of 1857 that had spelt ruin, not just for the walled city of Shahjahanabad, but also for the entire life world that Urdu poetry had come to be associated with. The institution of Mushaira or poetic symposia formed an important part of the cultural life around the princely courts and urban aristocracy during the Mughal period. Several poetic soirees or mushairas were held in the walled city of Delhi, in which the leading poets of the day recited their creations. The Lal Qila Mushaira, or the Mushaira held at the royal place, was one of the most prestigious ones. Patronized by the last Mughal emperor, who was a poet himself, it continued till 1857. Ghaziuddin Madarsa at Ajmeri Gate also hosted weekly mushairas. Farhatullah Beg's iconic short narrative, Dehli Ki Aakhri Shama, presents in graphic details the description of an imaginary Mushaira held at the courtyard of Mubarakun Nisa Begum and hosted and narrated by one Maulvi Karimuddin. Apart from the pen portraits of so many poets gathered in this imaginary Mushaira that included the likes of Zawq, Ghalib, Momin, Dagh, Shefta and Azurda, the book provides a detailed description of the etiquettes and material environment of the Mushaira. Beg narrates all the intricate preparations that go in the making of Mushaira venue, which is usually brightly lit, fragrant, aesthetically furnished with the white cushion flooring and well supplied with beautifully arranged betel leaves and cold water, etc. I would just like to read a few lines from Akhtar Kambar's English translation from the book. The entire house had been whitewashed with a mixture of lime and mica, which caused the walls to glimmer. There was such a profusion of chandeliers, candelabra, wall lamps, hanging lamps, Chinese lanterns, and other lights that the house was converted into a veritable dome of light. And then he resumes a few paragraphs later. Flower wreaths were hung on the walls on pegs and nails driven into the wall for the purpose. A white cloth with embroidered green borders on all sides was stretched across from one end to the other to make a white and green awning. From the center of the roof were hung rows upon rows of jasmine garlands and streamers, and these were fastened all around the walls of the canopy and created an umbrella of flowers. And it just goes on. Descriptions like these abound in the surfeit of sensorium, which serves not just as a setting, but a defining feature of the worlding of Urdu poetry. The poet, the poetry, and the space in which this poetry is recited and received all thus exist in a syntagm. This close affiliation between Urdu poetry and the spatio-temporal setting of Shahjahanabad, which together serve as an index of the identity of India's Muslims, is further delineated in Ahmad Ali's novel Twilight in Delhi. A requiem to the city in distress under colonial rule, the novel is set in the period between 1911, when in the Coronation Darbar, the foundation of New Delhi was laid by George V, and 1919. In the introduction of the novel, Ahmad Ali says, "My purpose in writing the novel was to depict a phase of our national life and the decay of a whole culture, a particular mode of thought and living, values now dead and gone before our eyes." The novel records the physical disfigurations of the city of Old Delhi caused in the process of preparation for the Coronation Darbar. The attendant changes include removal of deep gutters, demolition of city walls, the disfiguration of Chandni Chowk, the demolition of old city's central causeway, and cutting down of peepal trees. All these disturb the city dwellers who express their resentment by cursing the city. "To hell with you, Delhi." The narrative articulates Mir Nihal, the protagonist's fears, in these words: "The old culture," and I'm quoting, "the old culture, which had been preserved within the walls of the ancient town, was in the danger of annihilation. Her language, on which Delhi had prided itself, would become adulterated and impure. She would become the city of the dead." Thus, the loss of culture is most acutely experienced in terms of loss of language and poetry. A feeling of gloom, loss, and decay that haunts Mir Nihal, the protagonist of the novel, and all other characters associated with him, is given voice in the form of extracts from Persian and Urdu poetry in English translation that are interspersed throughout the narrative. Not only do the characters tend to resort to poetry to articulate their inexpressible feelings of melancholy, nostalgia, and anxiety, the two sections of the novel are also prefaced by lines from Hafiz and Ghalib. Urdu poetry and the embodied practices of singing, dancing, and listening is pitted against the emotional imaginaries of the banal that lie embedded in old city, lost in inertia and stasis. The picture of a night-muffled city, sleeping by lanes, oppressive heat, half-naked, tired, sleeping men, smell of flowers, getting smothered by heat, sniffing dogs, All these images are contrasted with lively and colorful scenes of wedding or the joyous celebration of Eid, or the olfactory and gustatory sensations induced by the smell of ghee, fat, oil, and burning meat, filling the air as the kebab vendors grill kebabs. Draw all these sensorial descriptions draw the reader into the sensorial experience of the city. The novel thus maps structures of feeling, and I'm using Raymond Williams' phrase, structures of feeling, through an extended description of the ubiquitous forms of material culture. Feelings are not dissociated from social realm. Lifestyle is not removed from historicity. An array of sounds ranging from wandering kawal singing in the distance, cries of a child somewhere outside, or mundane sounds like the peculiar noise of a silver leaf makers beating silver and gold, the chattering of sparrows, heartrending voice of a blind beggar, and the mournful and haunting sound of azan constitute the sonic world of the characters, a world that provokes mournful, morbid emotions. And closely tied to this dying world of the sensorium of the world of Urdu poetry, and closely tied to this dying world of sensorium is the world of Urdu poetry. It nostalgically evokes the past glory of the city and its present destruction at the hands of the colonizer, a feeling articulated through a beggar singing verses of Bahadur Shah Zafar, or through the words of Mir Taqi Mir, the famous Urdu poet, who while traveling to Lucknow in a bullock cart expressed his grief for Delhi. And this is how Ahmad Ali translates Amir. Why do you ask my native place, O dwellers of East, making mock of me for the poor plight I'm in? Delhi, which was once the jewel of the world, where dwelt only loved ones of fate, which has now been ruined by the hands of time. I am a resident of the storm-tossed place. The shift from the great poetry of Mir, Ghalib, Insha, Dard, Sauda, and Zafar to the rampant poverty of thought, and the slide from the sublime emotions and sentiments of Urdu poetry to cheap sentimentality of the colonial Delhi is experienced both metaphorically and literally in the novel as the replacement of life with death in life. Thus, bereft of any political agency to resist change and victims of helplessness and physical and spiritual inertia, the characters of the novel, like their author, not only seek refuge in Urdu poetry from the depravity that surrounds them, but also deem it as a beacon of hope for future resurrection. In Ahmad Ali's portrayal of the walled city of Shahjahanabad, or present-day Old Delhi, poverty and squalor lived in close proximity with royal opulence. Royal arcades and boulevards were surrounded by clumsy, narrow lanes. The colonial town planners of New Delhi visualized the cityscape completely differently when in 1911 they began constructing it to the south of what is now known as Old Delhi. The older incarnations of Delhi, however, did not disappear. It survived in its splendid monuments in some broken walls, pujas, and pallas. It also survived as a culture and a way of life. The chapters in Ali's novel recurrently end with words like, "and life went on," which foreground a worldview that treats loss and longing as normative. In deploying Urdu and Persian poetry in the novel, written in English, the textual space of Ali's novel is transformed into an embodiment of the city at the cusp of the old and the new. If Ahmad Ali's Twilight in Delhi captures the sense of loss suffered by the city's residents at the beginning of the colonial rule in the old Indo-Persian tradition of Shahr-e-Ashok, Anita Desai's In Custody returns to the much beloved city and culture of Mir Nihal within a pronounced modernist framework, a framework in which the city is no longer an object of love and longing. It is rather presented as a distinct site of decay, stagnation, and disjunction, invoking emotions of disdain. The claustrophobic chaos of Old Delhi is seen in Desai's novel as having a debilitating effect on the much revered Urdu culture of the past, underlining its slide from sublime to vulgar. In post-partition India, where Muslims constitute a minority, the grandeur of the late Mughal culture, with its celebration of great Urdu poets and poetry, music recitals and dancing courtesans, presented in Ali's novel in all their lyrical charm, have degenerated into vulgar excess within the noisy, overcrowded slums of Old Delhi in Desai's novel. In place of Mir Taqi Mir, Ibrahim Zogh, Dagh Dehelvi, who are so reverentially recalled by Ahmad Ali in Twilight in Delhi, the glorious past of Urdu is now hinged on the figure of the poet Noor Shah Jahan Abadi, his nom de plume or takhallus tying him to the city of Shah Jahanabad, a seat of Urdu literary tradition. Embedded in the figure of the poet Noor is the entire glory of Muslim past of Hindustan, whose grand architecture and literature have now been reduced to cheap sentimental songs sung by low-class singers of Bombay cinema, blaring into crowded streets, pan shops, barbers' shops, etc. In Custody is in fact the second novel by Desai that delves into the ruptures between the Muslim past and post-partition present through the spatial juxtaposition of old and new Delhi. Desai delineated the subject first in her novel Clear Light of Day, which was published in 1980, through the three families Ali, Das and Mishra, who have been neighbors in Old Delhi since so long as they could remember. In this novel, Bim, one of the central characters, articulates Desai's perception about this Genes-faced city of Delhi when she says, "Old Delhi does not change, it only decays. My students tell me it is a great cemetery. Every house is a tomb, nothing but sleeping graves. Now New Delhi, they say, is different. This is where things happen." In Custody moves beyond the Manichaean pitting of the sepulchral view of Old Delhi against the trendy and modern New Delhi to zoom in on the cesspool that Old Delhi and its rich literary heritage have now become. Young Deven Sharma teaches Hindi in a village of Mirpur. Deven's claim that Urdu is his true vocation and that he teaches Hindi only to gain livelihood underlines Hindi's participation and Urdu's non-participation in the money economy of post-partition India. The tension between the old and the new, Hindi and Urdu, Muslim and Hindu, are further amplified through the food metaphor in the novel. The austere meat offered by Deven is contrasted with the meal served by his colleague Siddiqui, where in place of the vegetarian buttermilk, radishes, there is rum, kebabs and pilau. These contrasts of food offered by Deven and Siddiqui are politically charged, in the sense that patterns of feeling and taste reflect worlding and foodstuff, and modes of consumption are a function of social class, religious affiliation, and local traditions. The post-partition minoritization of Muslims is attributed to their decadent anti-modern lifestyle in the novel. The sight and smell of food is further taken to its heights when both Noor and his wife Imtiaz Begum equate Deven with a carnivore and a jackal when Deven tries to prod Noor to record his poems. And I quote from the novel, one is what Imtiaz Begum tells Deven. She says, "I know your kind, jackals from universities, trained to feed upon our carcasses. Now you have grown impatient. You can't even wait till we die. You come to tear at our living flesh." And a few pages later, Noor also tells the similar thing to Deven. He says, "Do you think a poet can be ground between stones and bled in order to produce poetry for you? You think you can switch on that mincing machine and I will instantly produce for you a length of raw red minced meat that you can carry off to your professors to eat?" Thus, by conflating corporeal body with poetry and poet, Desai articulates a deep sense of insecurity that afflicts spaces of Urdu, Muslims, Old Delhi together, to whom their self-proclaimed custodians appear nothing more than a carrion bent on consuming everything that gives meaning to their lives. The novel gives rich sensory details to convey the erosion of the old in face of changes wrought by modernity, its addendant technology and money economy, whose jarring markers stand at odds with the old world. The billboard advertisements for refrigerator and cars, reflecting the aspirational realm of urban middle class, is set against the spatial details of grand architecture of Mughal Delhi. To situate the Urdu poet, by contrast, within a degenerate present. The narrow lanes of Old Delhi are no longer experienced as Awraq-e Musawwir as Mir imagined them. They rather invoke claustrophobia. References to smeared train window, flies hovering over sweets in food lanes of Chandni Chowk, the mud and dung-filled houses, the dead dog being eaten by crows, carcasses littering the landscape, or the dead fly in Deven's tea. All are aimed at foregrounding the dead pool of Islamic past, Urdu literary culture, and Muslims in contemporary India. They identify Urdu poetry and Islamic culture with rot, poison, and filth. Desai's novel captures the psychological, emotional, and mental responses to sensory experiences based on Desai's own perception of disjunctures between the medieval Islamic past and the colonial and post-colonial modernity. When Deven attempts to preserve the dying world of Urdu poetry by deploying the modern technology of recording, he wants to record Noor's interview, but he later discovers that the recording failed, and all that was left of the recording was not the recording of his own poetry, but his recitation of Keats' poetry. Deven's utter despair of Urdu, it articulates Deven's utter despair of Urdu heritage. Besides, by foregrounding poetry as performance, especially through Imtiaz Begum's soulful renditions, Desai also points towards general degeneration that has set in within the Urdu literary sphere as it moves from elite culture to mass popular cultural spheres. Deven finds himself trapped in the poet Noor's world of extravagance, yet he feels bound to the poet. While the only Urdu teacher of his college, Siddiqui, sells his family property to a real estate developer and other Urdu speakers seek jobs in other countries, Deven has become the custodian of what is left of the Muslim Urdu culture of India, reflecting Desai's only hope for Urdu or Old Delhi. If Deven, a Hindi teacher, emerges as a custodian of Urdu literary heritage, in Desai's novel, in Agha Shahid Ali's poem, this responsibility is shifted to the butcher in Old Delhi from whom he buys meat. The poetry of Indian American poet Agha Shahid Ali unpacks the various ways in which the city of Delhi shaped the consciousness of migrant Muslim poet. Ali's poem weaves the cartography of Delhi within the warp and weft of a larger tapestry of loss, as Ali reminisces about his parents, listens to Qawwali at the mausoleum of the great Sufi saint of the Chishtiya order, Nizamuddin Aulia, meets a Muslim butcher, remembers Shah Jahan, laments the ravaging of the city due to colonial aggression of 1857, and even recites Bahadur Shah Zafar's poem. In the poem, A Butcher, the poet delineates the spatial details of Old Delhi to articulate the decay and degeneration of the majestic Urdu literary culture and of the entire social order. The poem begins by articulating the location of the butcher's shop in this lane near Jama Masjid. The butcher is no longer an individual, but a representative of an entire landscape, which the town planners of a new sanitized city of Delhi have dismissed as unhygienic, unwieldy, and dirty on the basis of the manner in which the sight of blood, the smell of animals, and the sound of butchering knives or the smell of raw meat repel the senses of uninitiated outsiders. The entire edifice of Muslim history and Urdu literature is now indexed on the sensorium that the butcher provokes, where he wraps kilos of meat in a sheet of paper. The ink of news stains his knuckles. In view of the fact that Muslim butchers were presented as sources of urban violence and unsanitary social practices in colonial archives, an image that has sustained in post-partition modern India, Ali's mapping of the Islamic culture by invoking his interaction with the butcher gains an additional significance. In the process, the narrow lane in front of the majestic Jama Masjid, the Urdu language and literature, iconic Urdu poets like Mir and Ghalib form part of one scene. They all are emblematic of a lost culture, a culture that has been derided and that is being remembered today only because it is lost. And I quote from the poem, "The script is wet in his palms. Urdu, bloody at his fingertips, is still fine on his lips. The language polished smooth by knives on knives. He hacks the festival goats, throws their skins to dogs. I smile and quote a Ghalib line. He completes the couplet and he completes the couplet, smiles, quotes a mere line. I complete the couplet. He wraps my kilo of ribs. I give him money. The change clutters our moment of courtesy, our phrases snapping in mid-syllable, Ghalib's ghazal left unrhymed. The poet's interaction with the butcher, the poet's interaction with the butcher, in the poet's interaction with the butcher, the oral nature of Urdu poetry is foregrounded, whereby all classic poetic techniques and devices were meant to hold a piece of verse permanently in a person's memory, and by extension, in a community's living memory. The butcher and the poet connect with each other through this shared heritage. Thus, trapped in the globalized economy of the modern city, both the poet and the butcher, no matter how well equipped, become custodians of a grand Urdu literary heritage. Bloody, violated, hacked and discarded, the language survives, and though left unrhymed, the poetry is regained, and thus Old Delhi lives on, as do the Urdu language and literature, which are inextricably linked to it. As the poet asks in awe in the poem Chandni Chowk, Delhi, "Can you rinse away this city that lasts like blood on a bitten tongue?" Old Delhi thus continues to be experienced through the sensorium of taste and sound, and I quote Shahid Ali, "Memory of drought holds you. You remember the taste of hungry words and you chew syllables of salt." These lines resonate Ahmad Ali's Twilight in Delhi, where the writer says, and I quote, "Yet the city stands still intact, as do many forts and tombs and monuments, remnants and reminders of old Delhis, holding on to life with a tenacity and purpose which is beyond comprehension and belief." The binaries of the old and the new constitute in the novels of Ahmad Ali and Desai and in the poetry of Agha Shahid Ali stand challenged in Khushwant Singh's Delhi, while Ahmad Ali, Desai and Agha Shahid Ali position Old Delhi as the irreconcilable other of New Delhi and rely on what Charles Bond calls scenography of raptures in their textual reconstructions of the life in Old Delhi. Singh's novel marks a shift from these modernist reconstructions of the life in Old Delhi. In Khushwant Singh's novel, identities are more fluid, processual, and capable of accommodating differences. His novel deals with the dynamic relationship between spatiality and social processes, foregrounding the ways in which language, architecture, and other cultural practices of older Delhis have endured the impact of changes set in motion by the colonial and the post-colonial worldview. The protagonist of the novel is an educated Sikh, a globetrotter who lives in a modern apartment in Delhi, is friends with journalists, diplomats, politicians, and others in the upper echelons of power, and regularly visits the upmarket elite spaces of modern Delhi like India International Center, diplomatic quarters, coffee houses, Connaught Place, and so on. He, along with his mistress, Ahijra Bhagmati, visits various monuments of Delhi. And with each monument he visits, a first-person narrative of the past is conjured to capture the quotidian life of ordinary individuals of the period when the monument was built. And these narrators include Musaddi Lal, a Hindu clerk, Tamerlane, a tyrant, an untouchable Sikh, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, the Persian King Nadir Shah, Urdu poet Mir Taqi Mir, and Bahadur Shah Zafar, Ram Lakha, refugee from Pakistan, and so on. As we move from one speaking voice to the other, we discover the shifting foci of urban development. These narrators reveal the ways in which their lives have been altered by the experiences of the city and how events in their lives have impacted the cityscape. In this spatio-temporal fictional vision of the city, contours of cartography become alive in interaction with accounts of bodily experiences of people inhabiting those spaces, much in line with what Sennett calls or thinks of, when he talks about the city as made of flesh and stone. This ruptures the dominant historiography, which only focuses on the lives of rulers and elites. Even though the architectural monuments of the past may appear out of tune with the present ethos surrounding them, a closer scrutiny makes it clear that many forms of violence in the present are anchored in the past, and that shadows of the past loom large over the present, modifying the textures of its daily life. The novel phenomenologically engages with the city and with the way physical spaces act upon the body and shape the emotive and psychological experiences of the people inhabiting these spaces. Unlike Desai's novel that obsesses over health and hygiene, Singh's Delhi debunks such neoliberal privileging of the intellectual and economic order over pre-modern dynamics of caste or religion. Once again, Singh's narrator recurrently recites verses by Urdu poets to articulate his affective responses to the situation he's in. Not only this, Singh even chooses Ghalib's couplet as the epigraph of the novel. And I quote, "I asked my soul, what is Delhi? She replied, the world is the body and Delhi its life." In this way, Urdu poetry becomes the only vehicle to articulate the transnational narrator's perception of the city of Delhi as the fountainhead of life in the world. Both Delhi and Urdu poetry in Singh's novel thus transcend the ruptures between the old and the new, complicating the morphology of the post-colonial city, in which the identity of the collectivity keeps shifting regularly. Almost all the works that I have discussed so far invoke Urdu poetry in their reconstruction of the spatio-temporal setting of old Delhi. In their generous citing of Urdu verses of the leading Urdu poets, novels by Ahmad Ali and Khushwant Singh nearly transform into cultural spaces, the textual space of the novel into a site of the Mushaira. Conversely, Desai's novel and Agha Shahid Ali invoke the cultural memory of Urdu poetry in order to juxtapose it with the present state of decay. Desai, who grew up in the elite Anglophone background of New Delhi, relegates Urdu to the outmoded, pre-modern aristocratic Muslim society, which now wallows in the dingy, suffocating surroundings of Old Delhi. Desai's denigration of Old Delhi and the associated Urdu culture as stagnant, outmoded, and out of tune with the globalizing impulse of New Delhi lifestyle has its limitations. Questioning the scholars of globalization who have argued the adverse impact of market economy on local cultures, Taylor Cowan has termed the changes wrought by globalization as creative destruction. In Cowan's view, globalization does not necessarily result in the elimination of older cultures or lifestyles, but rather opens up avenues for a possible resurgence of local cultures, even in the wake of an increasing transnationalization and commodification of products, people, and ideas. In the same way, the public spaces in New Delhi have brought back the cultural practices associated with Old Delhi, such as poetic stories of Mushairas, Qawwali, Sama, or Dastan Gol, in a renewed form through stage performances that are also often live streamed on social media. If we pay close attention to two key cultural events that have come to occupy a prominent place in the cultural calendar of modern city, the annual Jashn-e-Rekhta and Jashn-e-Bahar, we can see how the sanitized stage performances of Mushairas invoke the soundscapes that mark the city in post-colonial times, even as their spatial origins is rendered invisible in the post-colonial city. Cultural production crafts our understanding of the city and reveals its complex structures of power, its racial and class cartographies, and demographic shifts. With globalization, there has been an unprecedented incursion of commercialism, bureaucratization, and large-scale corporate sponsorship. In this context, the transfer of sounds from their original setting to modern spaces turns audiences into consumers rather than active participants in those sonic cultures. The preponderance of digital recording of these mushairas circulated on YouTube and other social media platforms further transform a largely haptic experience into a phatic one, marking a disjuncture between the mushaira and its spatial settings. Mushaira at Jashn-e-Rekhta is a popular event in the cultural calendar of New Delhi. The Rekhta Foundation, run by Sanjeev Saraf Saab, successfully launched its website rekhta.org in 2013, which has ever since grown to become arguably the largest online repository of Urdu books. Encouraged by the success of the website, the foundation launched its first Jashn-e-Rekhta in 2015, which is the annual festival of Urdu. Here, open for all events invite Urdu's finest poets, authors, and artists to bring alive the magic of language. It is usually held in elite spaces like India International Center, Indira Gandhi Center for Arts, or as events continue to grow, the Major Dhyan Chand National Stadium. That's the latest venue. Even as the Jashn has transported Urdu out of its ghettoized location in Old Delhi to modern spaces, it recreates the ambience of Old Delhi by showcasing its signature products like fragrance of Itar, the antiquities of Old Delhi, handicrafts, delicate beauty of chicken curry, etc., as well as elaborate book exhibitions spanning across Urdu, Hindi, and English. The venue also features the food festival, Aiwan-e-Zaiqa, which allows the young and the old to savor cuisines such as Kashmiri, Awadhi, Hyderabadi, or Mughlai, along with the finest selection of popular street foods from Old Delhi. The festival showcases Urdu culture in all its versatility through performances, recitations, mushairas, panel discussions, debates, conversations on films, or calligraphy workshops. In this way, the Jashn offers the dwellers of the global city an opportunity to enjoy the charm of Old Delhi without having to suffer its narrow crowded lanes, the smell, and the noise. Jashn-e-Bahar Mushaira is yet another annual event dedicated to Urdu poetry. Organized by Jashn-e-Bahar Trust, the event aims to promote and nurture India's, and I'm quoting the website, India's rich syncretic literary tradition. In the 2 decades of its existence, the Mushaira has invited Urdu poets from across the world, as its website claims, and I quote, to regale the audience with myriad shades of poetic sensitivities, countless colors of modern day sensibilities, and the everlasting elegance of Urdu verse. The thrust once again is on nurturing Urdu sensibilities with a modern day approach, so that Urdu literary culture is not confined to the ghettoized spatial settings of Old Delhi or reductively identified with Islam. In these events, soundscapes generally associated with one religious identity, location, and culture are regulated, secularized, and adapted to suit the taste of modern city dwellers of Delhi. The overwhelming popularity of these mushairas points towards continuities embedded in outward ruptures. They represent entanglements of 2 separate structures of power and knowledge underlying the idea of Delhi. If in its pre-modern incarnation, the agential role in the meaning-making process in the Mushaira was invested with patrons and audiences, it has now shifted to poets and performers, re-establishing their autonomy. In getting transported spatially, Mushairas have also transformed the soundscape of popular culture by deploying emerging technologies. This produces a convergence of the material culture with the auditory and visual sensation of memory, affect, and poetry. YouTube recording and live Facebook broadcasts of Mushairas take the poetry performances beyond the confines of the Mushaira venue, wedding the local with the global. Mushairas originally served as signifiers of an aristocratic, patriarchal domain of power that did not admit the marginalized sections like women and lower classes or lower castes. In their present incarnations, however, such hierarchies have been largely removed. The audiences in these Mushairas come from diverse backgrounds and age groups and are both Urdu and non-Urdu speaking. The same audiences that enjoy movies on OTT platforms and in multiplexes also enjoy the Mushaira with equal gusto, thus de-reifying the erstwhile reified realm. In this manner, bearing taints of the Mughal and colonial past, the capital city of the new, resurgent, and globalized India has attempted to create modern spaces accommodating tradition and history through the staging of a heritage literary form. To conclude, the colonial restructuring of the city of Delhi drew stark lines across the spatial, architectural, linguistic, and cultural spheres of the social order, which was hitherto marked by what Sudipta Kaviraj has called fuzzy identities. This resulted in the production of a collectivity that was constantly engaged with complex negotiations involving everyday transactions and textures of memories embedded in language. Mapping the city of Delhi through engagements with cultures of Urdu poetry allows us to track these negotiations. Writings and performances I've discussed, I argue, may be viewed as sites embodying transactions among the multiple terrains of consciousness that mark the multi-layered city. The journey of Urdu poetry in Delhi and the various textual and performative engagements with it manifest the transition of the city of Delhi into a conjectural space where tensions and contradictions between the global, national, and local concepts of urban spaces are realized through diverse sensory stimuli. It allows us to register contestations and negotiations between individual autonomy and multiple legacies, asymmetries of power, and the idea of citizenship, which constitute Delhi as what Rashmi Verma has called the post-colonial city. Thank you so much.
Such a fascinating talk, really. Wonderful, so rich in content, so much variety in this, and especially your quote from Agha Shahid and Anita Desai, and obviously Ahmed Ali's book. It was wonderful and so informative. I thank you for really giving this talk. And now I invite a very dear friend, sort of my soul sister, Professor Farhat Nasreen of History Department, Jamia Islamia, for giving the concluding remark. Hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much, Razibai, for that really lovely and affectionate introduction. So, well, I'll just start straight away. The first thing that I would like to say is Nishat's presentation was in itself like a poetry. It was absolutely beautiful, mesmerizing, wonderful. And like you stated that the Mushaira was a part of a culture, and at the same time, it was also constructing a culture. So in a way, it fed on a culture, but it also feeded a culture. So it was a two-way process, and it was so deeply integrated into the way of life of Delhi. And you brought it out absolutely beautifully, not just from the beginning, but I think you just traveled through time and you traced how it underwent change as time passed and as the Mughal Empire declined and so on and so forth. Now, in this context, we must remember that Bernier, who's written a lot about the Shahjahanabad, who was a Francois Bernier, who was a French traveler during the reign of Shah Jahan. So he had a lot of predictions about Shahjahanabad. And he said that generally speaking, I mean, the people keep this place quite dirty. So I wouldn't be surprised that in a couple of years, Paris is going to overtake Shahjahanabad, although currently Shahjahanabad is in a very good state. So that was something that came to my mind. Then, of course, the Bazm-e-Akhir of Munshi Faizuddin, because he's also someone who's noting down that how everything is, kind of losing its charm. Like you spoke about how there was this wonderful food and there was a culture of food also, which was going on with the poetic culture and so on and so forth. So that was something which was also it was just losing its charm. That is something that Muhammad Rafi Sauda is also talking about, Mir also. So that was there. But more remarkably, there is this man, Maulvi Muhammad Baqir, who was the editor of the Delhi Urdu Akhbar. He has some very interesting things to say. When the revolt of 1857 began, and when Bahadur Shah Zafar II also became a part of the proceedings, and then there were soldiers who were coming from all parts of Hindustan and they were collecting in Delhi, finally, there was an opinion that Maulvi Muhammad Baqir had, and that was this, that he advised that the soldiers should not be sent to Delhi, because when they come to Delhi, they just get lost in the gullies of this place, in the charm of this place, in the food of this place. And then he goes on to say that they just get lost in the jalebis and the reveries and so on and so forth. And if they come here, then surely we are going to lose 1857 and we are not going to win against the British. So ask them not to come there, let them fight from their own regions. But Delhi is just going to suck them into its vibrancy and the charms that it has to offer. So that is something that he had to say. As far as the decay is concerned, there is again a very interesting report that comes from Maulvi Muhammad Baqir's Delhi Urdu Akhbar, where he says that the celebrations of Eid had happened and Bahadur Shah Zafar did not have the money to pay the Phoolwalas who had decorated the Red Fort, and that bill of the Phoolwalas had been pending for a very long time. And that was an issue which was troubling him. Then we have another issue of the law and order situation, which was deteriorating inside the Red Fort. So, of course, everything which was happening around the Mushairas, the patrons who would patronize, beautiful words, because beautiful words are something I think which is a luxury, that you have the time to indulge in them, to write them beautifully, to think about them, and then for people to have the spare time to listen to them and then again think about them. So I think everyone was losing that kind of a leisure. But there was a very interesting thing that you said, and I don't remember who you were citing, but you said that, and life went on. And life went on. So as life goes on, you find that there are people who will keep talking about this fascinating space which Delhi is. So you have in 2001, there is a movie called Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, Karan Johar, the famous director. You spoke about the difference between the old Delhi and the new Delhi, and how there is a boundary between that, and the old Delhi is looked at as a space which is not as cultured, as advanced, as sophisticated as New Delhi is. And that was a prominent part of this movie, although subtly stated, because now that you said it, one notices it more clearly, that, you have this woman who comes from Old Delhi. She has this halwai ki dukan. She actually has a halwai ki dukan. And then she's not accepted by the rich New Delhi family. So there's an issue there. Then in 2003, you have another song that comes which says, Tarpaye tarsaye re sari raat jagaye re pyar tera Dilli ki sardi. So that is, that is then looking at the culture of the place. Then of course, we have in 2009, which was a movie which again covers something that you just spoke about towards the end of your talk, which is fuzzy identities. And that was Delhi 6. Rakesh Om Prakash Mehra, 2009. Delhi 6 covered exactly the fuzzy identities, because you have this woman who wears a dupatta when she is leaving from Delhi, Old Delhi. And once she comes to New Delhi, then she takes off her dupatta and she folds it and she keeps it in her bag. So those are, because she's expected to wear a dupatta in Old Delhi because of the culture, but she wants to be like someone who is in New Delhi, more free and doing whatever she feels like doing. But the song, and there were a number of issues which Delhi 6 covered. But the song was absolutely classic because it went like this: Ye Dilli hai mere yaar, bas ishq mohabbat pyar, basti hai mastano ki Dilli, Dilli gali hai diwano ki Dilli 6. Then in the initial mushairas, like when people had all the time, you have Mirza Ghalib who writes the Band शायरी. So in the Band शायरी he would say, कि कोई मेरे दिल से पूछे तेरे तीर नीम कश को ये खलिश कहाँ से होती जो जिगर के पार होता. So you have to think so much, कि भाई वो तीर गया है, दिल में अटक गया है, and so on. Or maybe when you think of this very, very beautiful मीर पत्ता पत्ता बूटा बूटा हाल हमारा जाने है जाने न जाने, गुली न जाने बाग तो सारा जाने है, और मेहरो वफा व लुत्फो इनायत एक से वाकिफ इनमें नहीं, और तो सब कुछ रमज़ो किनाए तंजो इशारा जाने है. This is complicated. But now the point is this, that people who have poetry in their heads, people who use poetry to say what they want to say, are really not going to stop saying, even though they may not have the sophistication of Mir or Ghalib or anyone else. So you will keep having poems floating all around the place, no matter what happens. So, you would have these small little couplets that I hear from random, people who are not really poets, but some of them are really hard hitting. Like there's someone who said that, उड़बांध कमर क्यों डरता है, फिर देख खुदा क्या करता है. Or maybe somebody who said, इरादा कर लिया जब ऊंची उड़ानों का, फिर क्या नापना है कद आसमानों का. Or somebody who wrote about Delhi itself, कि एक शहर दीवाना सा अपना पर अनजाना सा, धूल भरी जलती सड़कों पे, अंधा धुन चलती सड़कों पे, ढूंढ रहा है कोई अपना, कुछ जाना पहचाना सा. So, like you said, that life goes on. So it is the spirit, the human spirit, which is absolutely undying. सब बर्बाद हो जाए, तब भी इंसान की जो आत्मा की शक्ति है, it keeps fighting back. तो जो कहना है वो कहना है, चाहे शब्द simplify हो जाएं, चाहे thoughts, are not presented in a very sophisticated way, but whatever has to be said has to be said. And you, my friend, you said it beautifully. So I would just end here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Razi bhai. Thank you.
Wonderful. So wonderful. So with this, we conclude this session, but now we'll move to question answer, which will be moderated by our host, Dr. Rafat Hussain. Before that, just an announcement that next Saturday we are off, but after that, we will be coming back with Danish Iqbal. Poster is not ready yet, just the theme that Danish Iqbal and Nilakshi Rai. Nilakshi Rai is a very famous dancer, classic dancer, and she will be portraying the poems of Mir, and the title is Baaq to Sara Jaane Hai, remembering Mir through music and dance, Danish Iqbal and Nilakshi Rai, on Saturday, April 29. So coming week we are off. So over to Dr. Rafat Hussain for question answer session.
Thank you, Razi bhai. Okay, so before we open the question and answer session or commentary session, I would like to thank Professor Nishat Zaidi. Oh, wow, what a beautiful and intellectual mapping of Delhi. It was indeed an intellectual revolution of a culturally rich Delhi. For me, it was indeed a learning experience. And thank you to Professor Anisur Rahman for the introduction. It's always very intellectual. And Professor Nasreen for equally beautiful and thoughtful concluding remarks. So thank you all. Thank you all the speakers. So session is open for question and answer, and everyone, most of us in this forum already know how to ask the question. You can raise your digital hand or you show your interest in the chat box. I will monitor both of them. So let's see if there is any hand raised. Not yet. Let me see chat. Okay, so you probably already see all the comments, and these are beautiful comments. So come on, raise the hands. Otherwise, I will list. Okay, here we go. Rudranshu is saying. Rudranshu, go ahead.
My question would be to Professor Zaidi. Your lecture was indeed wonderful. My question would be a bit different from the topic. That has there been any poetry, viable poetry written on Delhi in the last 10, 20 years? In English or in Urdu or any other language that you know of? Apart from the movies that were mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
There must be a lot of poetry written.
I'm sure, yes, because now every other person is a poet, and you know, at least 50% of my students are poets of some, you know, they all keep posting their poetry on social media, so they also have a fan following. So, I'm sure they must be, but yes, I cannot recall, you know, the way we commit poetry to memory, we only commit poetry of masters to memory. Yeah.
The latest book that is being written on poetry or city mapping of Delhi in the last 2 decades or a decade.
I mean, see, there are books not necessarily on poetry, but Saif Mahmood has written a book, you know, for example, Beloved Delhi. I mean, I must acknowledge all the younger ones who are writing on poetry in Delhi. You know, my very dear student Haris Kadi wrote a beautiful paper on Aga Shahid Ali's mapping of Delhi. On Saif Mahmood wrote a wonderful book on, you know, poets of Delhi called Beloved Delhi. Then Swapna Little was here in the talk. Madhulika Little was here in the talk, and she also has done some wonderful work on Delhi. And so, yes, of course, there is a lot of interest in Delhi. There is a lot of interest in poetry associated with Delhi, and lots of books are coming out. So there's no dearth of books as such.
May I just supplement Professor Zaidi?
Yes, please.
Please go ahead.
Sir?
Yeah, go
there are quite a few books that you have and that have come recently. In fact, I'm reminded of a book which has come just now, which is called Spaces. And it's a book about spaces, and cities figure there. Calcutta has been one of the most important cities that has attracted the attention of the poets. And next to that is Delhi. And very interestingly, Delhi engages the attention of younger poets more than it engaged the attention of the older poets. For various reasons, political reasons, socio-cultural transformation that has taken place. And not only in their own languages, that is Urdu, Hindi, Bangla, whatever, but in the English language. So a huge amount of poets writing, right? Professor Zaidi rightly said that lots of poets are writing today, because I'm not very sure of what kind of poetry that could be possibly, but many of them are also learning to write poetry and learning to understand their own spaces in which they have been navigating for a long time. So a space and the politics of the space has engaged the attention, especially if you look at the post-colonial context, you will find that the space and the politics of a space, its socio-cultural markers, and Delhi is one of the most important spaces. And it's just as I mentioned, home, for example, home, city as a home, and city as a metaphor, and city as a myth, they have constructed in many ways. And I've personally come across a number of poets who have written this. And of course, that poetry, I cannot say for sure that it has really made a mark and finally has come to a stay. That might vanish with time also. But the very fact that there are poets and poems are being written on spaces, especially like a space like Delhi, it's very something very encouraging to see.
No, I totally agree with you, Professor Rahman. There are so many younger poets, as I said, you know, because they have access to audience, direct access to audience through social media. You know, and they're very popular, and some of them are also invited to Mushairas, etc. So all of them are writing, and many of them are writing about Delhi. But yes, poetry has a recall value only, you know, when you listen to it, when it makes a deep impact on you. So I'm not so sure about the quality; only time will tell. But yes, a lot of writing is happening.
Prof. So,
Okay.
I think,
yeah, sorry, I was, I had an phone call.
I see Professor David Lelivel here and Dr. Mozam Siddiqui, so just keep in mind.
Okay, so before we go on the question and comments, let's pick up from Mozam Saab for a brief commentary and then Madam Prashad. Mozam Saab, please go ahead.
David
मेरा
sorry.
सलाम सबको खास तौर से प्रोफेसर अनीसुर रहमान को और so very fascinating presentation and I was reminded of the famous adage that Delhi 99 बार उजड़ी और 99 बार फिर आबाद हुई. So what we listened this afternoon was one of those 99 stories of Delhi's ruin and coming back to life. And I was also reminded of, I come from Hyderabad, so the city of Hyderabad, Charminar and the surrounding area. And as Professor Zaidi was, giving her lecture, and I could see the echo of her presentation in the lanes and streets of the old city of Hyderabad. And also, since there was a mention of Ahmad Ali Saab many times, Professor Ahmad Ali was a visiting professor at Columbia University, and he gave a series of lectures there, and he collected those lectures in a book form. It's called The Golden Tradition, and I had the opportunity in 1985 to interview Ahmad Ali Saab in Karachi at his residence, and he told me that he had 20 minutes to talk to me, and he was very busy. So I agreed. So we started talking, and by the time I left his house, it was 3 hours plus. And that interview is preserved at the archives of Voice of America Urdu Service. And also I have a personal copy somewhere of that interview. So I have many, also speaking of Agha Shahid Ali, because I also had opportunity to meet and talk to Shahid Ali. So Professor Zaidi's lecture, rekindled so many, memories in my mind. Thank you very much for a very fantastic presentation. And over to, if David Laliweld is here, we would like to hear from David. Shukriya.
Yes, he is here.
एक अगर आप मौका दें तो मैं एक शेर सुना दूं जो आपने 99 टाइम्स के बारे में बात की. शहरे दिल एक मुद्दत उजड़ा बसा गमों में आखिर उजाड़ देना उसका करार पाया. So this is about multiple devastations of the city of Delhi.
Yeah, and also something I forgot to mention, the popularity of Mirza Ghalib, because before Ghalib started participating in those Mushairas that Professor Zaidi so beautifully described, very few people appreciated Ghalib's poetry. And once he started composing ghazals for those Mushairas, he became really a popular poet. And most of Ghalib's popularity to this day rests on those ghazals which he wrote for those Mushairas. Thank you.
Prof.
Yeah, thank you, Mozam Saab. Professor Laliweld, please unmute yourself. Okay, I ask you to unmute. Please go ahead. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Not responding.
Since Mozam Saab has called on me, I better say something. And I very much appreciated Professor Zaidi's sweeping talk, which went all the way from the earliest time into globalization and such. I have one small thing that I'm curious if anybody here knows about, which is refers to Ahmed Ali and Twilight in Delhi. And that is, there is a translation of Twilight in Delhi, published as translated by his wife, whose name I unfortunately don't remember. And I have often been told that in fact it is the original, and that the work is so much better in Urdu than in English, and is so seeped with Urdu imagery and so on, that English could only be a translation of an Urdu original. I don't know if that's true. I met Ahmed Ali and spent a lot of time 10 years before Muazzam did, and in Karachi, and I met his very talented wife as well, and I don't doubt that she was quite capable of high achievement, but I don't know. The other thing I would just add is the literature about Delhi by Pakistanis who think of who write in that same mode of nostalgia. And the one that comes to mind is Intizar Hussein's wonderful travelogue of Delhi. There's also something by Mumtaz Mufti. And both of them are fine pieces of literature that perhaps could be included in this, in this survey.
Thank you, Professor Lalit and Muazzam Saab, both of you. Yeah, go ahead.
May I
if you wanted
respond?
to make. Yeah, please.
Yeah,
Please.
thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Lalwell. Yes, you are absolutely right. That is what I mean. I have not read the translation, but the translation is by Bilqis Jahan, his wife, which is called Dilli Ki Sham. And it is said that this is novel's homecoming, because you know, it in Urdu it reads like an original, and English reads like a translation. But then this is also said about almost all Indian writing in English, that it reads like a translation. It used, you know, people say about Agha Shahid Ali's poetry that he used to write Urdu poetry in English. It is said about Amitav Ghosh that he writes Bengali novels in English. So I think you know, that is the same kind of, you know, same kind of you know, feeling one has while reading Indian literatures, you know, in English. Secondly, you mentioned Intizar Hussain Saab's a wonderful book. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, Dilli Jo Ek Shahar Tha is such a beautiful book. I absolutely you know, relish enjoy reading that book. I have read it so many times, and I still, you know, the descriptions of jinnats of Delhi and trees of Delhi and temples of Delhi, it's absolutely fascinating. So for anyone interested in Delhi, I would strongly recommend that book. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's come back to the question. Iltifat Hassan, please.
बहुत शुक्रिया रफत and बहुत शुक्रिया प्रोफेसर ज़ैदी. What an incredible talk. मुझे तो अपने स्टूडेंट डेज याद आ गए, which was many moons ago. तो मैं इस वक्त अपने पास एक नोटबुक और एक पेन लेके बैठा हूँ. तो एक तो आपसे दरख्वास्त है कि जो आपका ये लेक्चर है, अगर आपके पास लिखा हुआ है तो प्लीज इसे पोस्ट करें, क्योंकि इट्स वर्थ रीडिंग 2 or 3 times. इट इज सो डेंस विद फैक्ट्स एंड इंफॉर्मेशन कि ये रियली पूरी बात समझ में नहीं आई. तो विद ऑल हम्बलनेस आई रिक्वेस्ट, अगर ये पॉसिबल हो तो आप लिखें, ये अगर आप हमें प्रोवाइड कर दें. एक सवाल है जो कि अनरिलेटेड है, मगर बहुत दिन से मेरे दिमाग में है, तो मैं पूछ लेता हूँ. बड़े लर्नेड लोग यहाँ हैं. जो हमारी शायरी है 18th और 19th सेंचुरी की, इस कदर ब्यूटीफुल, इस कदर इसमें डीप फिलॉसफी है कि इसके लिए बहुत ही हायर लेवल ऑफ इंटेलेक्ट चाहिए था. जबकि दूसरी तरफ साइंस में हम बिल्कुल बैरन रह गए. तो ये क्या हुआ कि एक तरफ तो इंटेलेक्चुअल डेवलपमेंट इतना अच्छा है और दूसरी तरफ साइंस में 0. तो इसका कोई है ख्याल इसके बारे में?
जी, इसका जवाब आई थिंक सबसे बेहतर तरीके से इंतज़ार साहब खुद ही देते हैं अपनी राइटिंग्स में, जब वो कहते हैं कि हमारे यहाँ गम इश्क और गम रोज़गार अलग नहीं हुआ करता था। इसी वजह से हमारे यहाँ जो है वो इश्क एक डिफाइनिंग फोर्स था और वही शायरी को भी गवर्न करता था। ये साइंस की द प्रिविलेजिंग ऑफ साइंस हैपेंड ओनली व्हेन वी डिसोसिएटेड गमे इश्क एंड गमे रोजगार, सो दैट इज पॉसिबली द रीजन व्हाई वी हैव नॉट रियली बीन so much into science and technology and things like that.
एक पॉइंट अगर ऐड कर सकूं मैं रफत साहब, एक पॉइंट अगर आप इजाजत दें तो मैं ऐड कर सकूं।
ऑलरेडी आस्किंग यू प्रोफेसर रहमान साहब,
मैं एक बात ये कह रहा था, आपने बहुत अहम सवाल पूछा है। ये जो शायरी का जिक्र आपने किया उसका उसकी जो अजमत है उसकी एक वजह ये है कि ये वो ज़माना है 18वीं और 19वीं सदी का जिसका जिक्र आपने किया। ज़बान बन रही थी उस ज़माने में, मीर ज़बान को बना रहे थे और उसके पहले उन्होंने एक मॉडल जो दिया था वो वली ने दिया था। तो वली से मीर और सिराज से गालिब, ये ज़माना वो है जब ज़बान बन रही थी और ज़बान के साथ साथ एक रिवायत बन रही थी, ट्रेडिशन। और साइंस के बारे में तो रवि साहब यहाँ मौजूद हैं, वो शायद आपको बेहतर बताएंगे, लेकिन किसी ज़बान का बनना वो अपने आप में एक बहुत मार्कतुल्लाह ज़माना होता है। दूसरी बात यह है कि जो ज़माने के हवादिस थे उसने उस ज़बान को बड़ा चैलेंज किया और उस ज़बान से कहा कि तुम आजमा के तो देखो मेरे जो तजुर्बात हैं, क्या तुम उसको समो सकते हो। तो मीर ने समो लिया उस तजुर्बे को अपने अंदर, जिस तरह सिराज ने भी समो लिया था। सूफी मनुष्य थे और उसके बाद गालिब ने, तो 1857 हो या उसके पहले का ज़माना हो, तो मेरा ख्याल है कि एक ट्रेडिशन बन रही थी दो तरहों से, कि एक तो ज़बान की ट्रेडिशन बन रही थी और दूसरी ये कि जो लिटरेरी एक्सप्रेशन में जो कैनन बन रहा था वो कैनन बन रहा था बहुत ज़बरदस्त। बल्कि आप देखिएगा तो इन्हितात का ज़माना उसके बाद आता है जबकि उर्दू इस्टेब्लिश हो चुकी है। 18वीं सदी में पहली बार कहा गया कि उर्दू ज़बान है, तो ज़बान के बनने का जो अमल था वो बहुत अहम था और उसी ने उस तजुर्बे को भी फ़रोग़ दिया जो तजुर्बा हमारे लिए आज तक बहुत अहम है, जिसके बारे में आप सब जानते हैं।
थैंक यू।
एक फॉलो अप सवाल कर लूँ, इजाजत हो तो?
जी, क्विक, गो अहेड।
हाँ, क्विक, वेरी क्विक। तो प्रोफेसर जैदी और प्रोफेसर रहमान साहब, अगर चंद किताबें अनीता देसाई की, क्योंकि अनीता देसाई ने बेइंतहा किताबें लिखी हैं, खुशवंत सिख ने लिखी हैं, तो अगर आप लोग मेंशन कर सकें कुछ किताबें जो कि दिल्ली के ऊपर हैं, वो बड़ी आपकी इनायत होगी।
दो किताबें तो मैंने डायरेक्टली मेंशन कर दी थी, क्लियर लाइट ऑफ डे और इन कस्टडी जिसके बारे में मैंने जिक्र किया। ये दोनों नॉवेल्स डायरेक्टली दिल्ली के बारे में हैं।
लाइट ऑफ डे और दूसरी आपने क्या
फरमाया? क्लियर लाइट ऑफ डे और दूसरी नॉवेल जिसका जिक्र मैंने किया इन कस्टडी।
इन कस्टडी। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया रफत, आपका भी
थैंक यू।
बाद में लिस्ट ईमेल से
यू कैन गेट लिस्ट थ्रू दी रजी भाई।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया रजी भाई।
ओके, द नेक्स्ट पर्सन इज आयशा रशीद, प्लीज गो अहेड। Aisha, yeah. Okay, I will come back to her.
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you so much. I perhaps forgot my question. It was a scintillating talk, Nishat Appa, excellent. I really thoroughly enjoyed every word of it, and the high literariness of your talk really impressed me. A question in मेरे ज़हन में, you mentioned that the culture lasts even in a decade form. I may be paraphrasing you, or I may be wrong. You can correct me if I'm wrong. My question is that on YouTube we find presence of Mushaira or performance poetry that is a kind of substitute for live Mushairas that we used to have as a part of our culture. And we still do have them, but they are, in my opinion, a little diluted and less frequent nowadays. And there used to be a huge fatigue element in live Mushairas. And you said that in YouTube also, in the videos, through reels, maybe on social media platforms, and YouTube videos which are uploaded on YouTube, we still have haptic as well as fatigue element in the performances that we can witness. So do you think here also, like you mentioned in your lecture, here also there is some kind of dilution of the element of phatic and haptic appeal to the audience? And it doesn't have the same appeal, or this, it cannot rouse passion in the audience in the way a live mushaira used to. Can. Yeah. This is my question.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll respond to your question. Thank you, Aisha, for your very kind words. I'll respond to your question very quickly. First of all, we tend to assume that cultures are, cultures are stagnant, given closed forms. Cultures are dynamic and they change with time. That is one thing. Secondly, as for the the reference to how globalization does not lead to complete erasure of pre-modern or other traditional cultures and traditional cultural forms. It revives them, and when globalization revives them through the technologies of globalization, there is bound to be transformation, there is bound to be change. So those changes are there that you get to see in YouTube mushairas. Now haptic and phatic, I use in the sense that that Arjun Appadurai has used in his discussion of caste, and by haptic I mean what you can experience through touch, through sensory experience. By phatic is what what is removed from you. So in that sense, YouTube mushairas had transformed the haptic experience into a phatic experience. Haptic experience in the sense that you notice in descriptions of Faratullah Beg, there is sense of smell, there is sense of sound, everything sort of attacks you. So that kind of sensory experience is not there in YouTube mushairas, where the entire environment contributes to poetic recitations. So it is in that sense that I use the haptic and the phatic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
7D say okay. Thank you. Yeah, you gave my answer. I'm satisfied with the answer. एक question है, मतलब वो जो 7D effect होता है, that's gone.
So
Okay.
what was the question, Professor?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Syed Haider Saab, and after that, Kaisar Naqvi Saab, I can read his question if he. And Professor Sinha, Ravi Sinha Saab, I will put you on the spot, so be ready. And please go ahead, Syed Haider Saab.
जी निशात जैदी साहिबा, बहुत मालूमाती और इतना ज़्यादा मालूमाती था कि मैं सोच रहा था कि बार जुमले आपके रीप्ले करके दोबारा सुनूं. तो वाकई फिर एक और बात ये कि आप मेरी छोटी बहन की नेम सेक भी हैं. तो आपसे सवाल ये है कि जिस तरह कोकनी लंदन की पहचान है, दक्कनी हैदराबाद की पहचान है, इसी तरह करखंदारी दिल्ली की पहचान है. और बल्कि डॉक्यूमेंट्री हो या ड्रामा हो, अगर दिल्ली को रिप्रेजेंट करना हो तो कैरेक्टर जो है करखंदारी बोल के उसको जस्टिफाई करता है. तो इसमें क्या सिचुएशन है? उसमें भी कई शायरी हुई, मुशायरों में पढ़ा जाता है, या क्या सूरत हाल है करखंदारी का, जो कि सारी दुनिया जानती है उसको?
Please be in English. Better hoga English mein, so that others can also enjoy.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So I was talking about Karkhandari, that the accent which is of course all over the world. The cities are recognized by that, like London.
Yeah, I got your question.
The Cockney and
I got your question. May I respond?
Yeah, please
go ahead.
Yeah, you see, as I mentioned, Mushaira and Urdu poetry belong to elite circles. Karkhandari was not the language of elite circles. And that is the reason why all the great Urdu poets, even though Mir used a lot of Indic words, but I don't think, and Anisa might also like to add to that, I don't think any of these poets used Karkhandari in their poetry, because Mushaira and poetry, they were, the pursuits of the elite, the feudal classes.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Kaisar Naqvi Saab. I can read. Were there any Europeans who participated in Zaidi Mushaira? The Hindi-English dictionary was produced at Fort William College, Calcutta. Okay, go ahead, please. Any one of you, either Anisur Rahman Saab or Professor Zaidi, please go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. There were many poets. I mean, I remember the name of Shore. There were so many poets, British and Anglo-Indians who, who composed poetry in Urdu. And they also had their takhallus. I think Ram Babu Saxena has a book on, on Urdu poets, British and Anglo-Indian, European and Anglo-Indian poets of Urdu. So there were many, many poets. And in fact, I'm forgetting the name. Even in Mirza Faratullah Beg's, book, one of the poets who recites poetry is a European poet. So there were many poets who actively participated in the Mushairas, kept their taqallus, and composed poetry.
Thank you so much. And there is another question from the person by the name Samsung. Is there any evidence of Agha Shahid Ali participation in any Mushaira except his affiliation with Begum Akhtar? Could you please suggest some books on Agha Shahid Ali?
Well, Agha Shahid Ali was a poet of English, not Urdu. So, obviously he did not participate in Mushairas. He participated in poetry reading sessions. There are recordings of his poetry reading and so on and so forth.
Well, I can just add to that. Professor Zaidi herself has done a book on Agha Shahid Ali. This was done for Sahitya Academy, which is the National Academy of Letters, and she published a monograph on that. And the other additional information is that Agha didn't write in Urdu or even know the Urdu language, but he knew Urdu through Begum Akhtar and through the ghazals of Begum Akhtar. It's a very interesting phenomenon that we have across, because that is how he learned this language, and he fell in love with this language, and that is how he wrote his ghazals in English, and which has inflamed the imagination of a huge number of poets in India today, and all of them are writing ghazals today.
Yes, Urdu was not the language of his, language that he learned in school. Urdu was a language that was spoken at his home. His father spoke Urdu. There are so many verses of Faz that he remembered because he had heard them from his father. So, Urdu was spoken at his home, and that is what Urdu was his first language. Urdu was a language that he was very close to.
Thank you. So, Kaisar Naqvi Saab, you raised your hand again. Do you wanted to add something or?
Yes, thank you very much, Nishat. You were very happy with your presentation. Thank you again. I wanted to thank you personally, and you are answering my question also. This is a Pakistani calling from Canada, so it's a little double program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kaisar Saab. Thank you again for attending this session. And your next person is Hadi Umayya, and then I will also put Abdul Jabbar, non-Urdu speaking person, for his experience. So go ahead, and then after that, after Umaira Hadi Saab, Professor Sena. Go ahead, Hadi Saab.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. And actually, like when I saw the advertisement, like I live in Washington, D.C. right now. And I saw the advertisement with Nishat Zaidi. And Nishat, she was one of my professors when I was in India in 2008. I don't know if you remember me or not, because like, yeah. So I said, let me go in that field because like, I'm writing poetry as well. And I'm a professor. I was like teaching translation, one of the university here. And also like, I was like teaching in Iraq as well. And I just like, I want to add one thing, like, it was very interesting topic for us, like, that this is like a part of culture as Professor Zaidi said. And for us, like to connect it with the Arab culture, it very much close, because the Mushaira, like we still have it and we still do it. Like, you know, we call it majalis sometime. And for those people, when those poets gather, they started reciting. But the point that I'm trying to make here, before, when they were doing that Mushaira, they were just reciting it. It was verbal. It was not written. So that's very much like the connection that I'm trying to make between Old Delhi and New Delhi. So what documented and undocumented. So that is the connection that I'm trying to make. Dr.
Yeah, Hadi, thank you so much, and it's lovely to have you here and lovely to see you after so many years. It's not true that they were only reciting and not writing. You know, if they had done that, then probably those writings wouldn't have passed on to us. You know, Ghalib published his Diwan. In fact, printing press had come into India in 1800. Even before that, they used to have more manuscripts. So they did write their poems. It's not that they just recited through memory.
Yeah, that I just made the connection with Souk Okab. If you guys know it, that souk, like it was like before Islam, all the poets goes to that market and they start reciting poetries. And what left from that souk and all the poets that they were reciting, and that event, it continued for 20 days. And imagine, like every year they repeating the same events. And right nowadays, what we have left from these, we have just like a few pages, like you can count them. So we lost so many just because they were, that's what I'm trying to. So Old Delhi and New Delhi, very much because, you know, with all the technology that we have it today, and, you know, it will help a lot to save.
I think your question takes me back to history, the sense that you are aware of the literature of Smriti and Shruti, that when you say something, that becomes a part of your memory, even though the pen and the paper is not there. So India has had a very, 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 very long tradition of Smriti literature and Shruti literature. Shruti means what you say and which is preserved in your mind, and hear and then write it down. So it's an old tradition, and because Professor Zaidi rightly mentioned 1800 and the coming of the press, and that is how Ghalib becomes so important for us, because he was a very, very careful editor of his own work, and he didn't publish everything, only 235 persons, and that is how Ghalib is Ghalib to us. So there is a long tradition of the Smriti and Shruti literature, what is said and what is preserved in the papers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I think I covered all the questions, those who raised hand or showed interest, but now I am coming to the special commentary session. Professor Ravi Sinha, and then Abdul Jabbar, and then probably I will pick a few more people.
Thank you, Rafat Saab. You know, today I run the risk of, if I try to say anything, to expose myself as the cultural brute that I am. So I will rather just ask two small questions. One of the questions I have partly relates to the question about relationship of poetic philosophy, let me say that, and science, you know, or poetic philosophy and rational analytical philosophy. That question, I think we on the subcontinent, you know, we are faced with that question. Why did not we were such a great civilization, and yet why did we not develop science? But that is such a question that will take the discussion somewhere else, which is not the topic of the evening today. So my question is that when the poets, I have two questions, you know, to Anis Sahab or Professor Zaidi, or I don't know whether she's there or not, anyone. Question number one, the philosophers who are considered kind of philosophical poets, you know, are they philosophical more in the social sense or in the mystical spiritual sense? Most of, I mean, I am not
well read at all in Urdu poetry. But what is popularly known as philosophical poets, and what are popular examples of their quotes that are known to me, they are more like mystical inner gaze, you can say, looking inside oneself, whereas philosophy could be, could have external gaze too, gauge on the universe. I remember that famous Mir Taki Mir thing, Ahmad Sahal Hame Jano Firta Hai, something barso, tab khas ke parde se insan nikalte hain. That always amazes me. Mir could say that much before theory of evolution, or much before science made comments like that. So, but mostly beyond those rare examples, mostly philosophy is equated with spirituality, mysticism, some kind of religious experience, and so on. Do you know of poetic additions to what I would call real philosophy, which can then subsequently lead to science? So that is the question number one. And question number two is, Delhi ke baare mein ye kaha jata hai, ye nagar 100 martaba loota gaya. So, this, the city that was devastated several times, ravaged, the city that was on the decline, generated a lot of poetry. Do you know of examples of the times on the rise or city on the rise that also generated a lot of poetry? Are there examples कि जब उरूज पे था तो भी poetry आ रही थी कि जवाल पे ही poetry थी, जवाल के time में ही? So these are the two questions I will have.
Thank you, Professor Sinha.
May I respond quickly, then probably Anisa. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ravi Sinha Saab. You're right. The science question is, it's a difficult question. But your first question was about philosophy, and whether there was just a spiritual philosophy or social philosophy. In the times that these poets wrote, I think spiritual was not so cut off from the social. Kabir was writing in Akbar's time, and then Urdu poets a few centuries later, Urdu comes on the scene. So this was the time when the spiritual was closely tied to the social, and contemplation about the spiritual was not dissociated from the social. And that is the reason why you find in poetry of Ghalib, in poetry of Mir, so many contemplations that are about spiritual influence, inner gaze, as you said, but also about social realities. So they about caste structures, about empirical context. So a couplet like Daro Haram Aine Takrare Tamanna, it can be taken at a very spiritual level, but at the same time it's also about the context in which he was writing. So a lot of times there's a conflation of the social and the spiritual, which was there in those times, and which is found in these philosophical poets, so to say. So unlike Rekhti poets who were writing about everyday mundane, these writers who were deep thinkers were not thinking only in terms of renunciation, spiritual in terms of renouncing the realm of the social, but they were actually contemplating about the social through the gaze of the spiritual. And so I think there was a conflation as far as Ghalib and Mir and others are concerned. Then secondly, your question about rise. Urdu poetry sadly came on the scene when Delhi was on its way to decline. So that is that is why Faratullah Beg used the title Delhi ki Aakhiri Shama, because the candle lights brightest when it is about to be put off. So so that is what you see. I mean, the entire gamut of Urdu poetry, which shines very bright. 18th century, 19th century Urdu poetry. That was also the phase when Delhi was in decline. So I think that is the reason why we don't have poetry about rise.
Just to supplement in 2 sentences, if you allow, just 2 sentences, if you allow. Sinha Saab all great poetry has its foundation in metaphysics. Poetry is not simply an expression of emotion. Within the emotion, there is a philosophy that you have. So very precisely said that all great philosophy has its foundation in metaphysics. And the second question that you raised is whether science is there. Yes, I will just present one shade to you. Chakbast. Zindagi kya hai? Anasir mein zuhure tartib. Maut kya hai?
क्या है
अज्जा का परेशान
होना जी जी
So one needs not explain. This is pure science. And you can just go on explaining this.
So can I add something here?
Yeah, please go ahead quickly.
Yes. So Ravi sir, actually Delhi itself is a city which was also celebrated a lot, because if you look at the Persian writings, you have Tajul Masir of Hasan Nizami, Amir Khusro, all of them, Ibn Battuta, all of them write a lot about Delhi, how beautiful and grand it was. In fact, when Shah Jahan thought that he'll shift the capital from Agra to Delhi, he was thinking that he's going to a better place. It just so happens that it declines.
Thank you so much, Abdul Jabbar Saab.
So thank you, a fantastic presentation, enjoyed it. So my question, you have talked about past and present collusion or diffusion. Last week, Professor Akil Bilgrami talked about Janus phase of society, or the thinking of how you, when he talked about Gandhi's on caste. So clearly the society confronts both the past and the present. So in terms of your exposition of the poems, poetry, the poets, so how do they, do you see some sort of conflict or a fusion? How do they conceive that idea, the past and the present? I'm making a sense, I'm not sure. But I think it's basically, he was talking about, when you talk about the past, then the present, there is a conflict or fusion or some sort of contradiction. The poets appear to be exposed that kind of contradictions. That's why they are very powerful in the way they express them.
Well, I don't know how to respond to this question, because the poets that we are talking about, you know, the peak, the pinnacle of Urdu poetry, the period of pinnacle of Urdu poetry, poets in those days, you know, all the great masters that we discuss, they did talk about the decay, the decline. You know, Ghalib lived to see 1857. They did talk about the past. They did talk about the changes. You know, the couplet that I decided, Shehre dil ek muddat ujda basa gamo mein, right? Ghalib in his letter talks about, you know, how Delhi has changed. Delhi mein ab sirf Hindu hai, Musalman hai, ab Urdu bolne wala nahi bacha, things like that. He says, you know, how people, the society is divided along, you know, religious lines, along communal lines. So these are definitely the observations that Urdu poets also make, and that are embodied in their poetry. So of course, you know, the changes are recorded in Urdu poetry, even though it has this spiritual and philosophical, you know, angle to it, dimension to it. But the contemporary changes, the changes that were happening in front of the poets, they do record that. Then as for the contemporary poets, you know, you have, you know, Rahat Indori, you have Habib Jalib in Pakistan. They all are so politically charged poets. You have Faiz Ahmad Faiz, you know, they do, you know, notice, observe, record, you know, the transitions, the changes that have happened over the years in terms of social structures of society, in terms of economic structures of the society, in terms of the plight of the community, everything. So that would be my answer.
So, thank you. I don't know whether that's one more question, contemporary topic. We are hearing about the educational establishment tried to erase some of the past. So Mughals especially, also the Gandhis past. So can you comment on them? Because clearly when I listen to you or reading about stuff, there is no way the erasing the past is going to be successful. So what is the context? Why this concept at this stage of India's evolution as a democracy?
Well, I mean, this is not related to my topic, but at the same time,
I know that. Yeah.
The state itself has responded to this question. You know, NCERT syllabus was very heavy. They are changing the under NEP the entire syllabus, not just of schools but also universities, is undergoing change. They are introducing 1 year probably class 12th and 4-year BA degree and things like that. So syllabus has to be cut down. All syllabi are being cut down, revamped, revised. So I think we should wait and instead of jumping to comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. And that concludes the question and answer session. Before we leave, I do have some open question for Muazzam Saab, Anisur Rahman Saab, or anyone wants to pitch in. Because we are in a virtual world now. So I'm talking about the in-person Mushaira or virtual Mushaira. I know the pro and cons, whatever my mind can think of, but I want to know something deeper than the general public thinks. Okay, Wawa is missing in this and that. So what do you guys think the future of Mushaira, virtual versus in person?
तो मैं कुछ कहूँ इस बारे में?
जी
हाँ, तो मुशायरा जो है एज एन इंस्टीट्यूशन तो ये जारी रहेगा। ये और बात है कि वक्त के गुजरने के साथ साथ और जो डिमांड्स होंगे सोसाइटी के, कल्चरल डिमांड्स, लिंग्विस्टिक डिमांड्स, उनको पेश नज़र रखते हुए मुशायरे का इंस्टीट्यूशन जो है काफ़ी डायनामिक है और इसका डायनामिज़म जो है जारी रहेगा। और ये और बात है कि मौजूदा शक्ल में ये ना रहे, क्योंकि कोई भी चीज़ जो डायनामिक होती है वो वक्त के साथ बदलती जाती है। तो मुशायरा भी फ्यूचर का जो है मेरे ख्याल में वो ऐसा नहीं होगा जैसा कि हम आजकल का मुशायरा देखते हैं, बल्कि अगर आप आजकल के मुशायरों को पिछले मुशायरों के बारे में जिसका जिक्र प्रोफेसर जैदी ने किया, दिल्ली के मुशायरे, ख़ास तौर से मोहम्मद शाह रंगीले के दौर में नादिर शाह के हमले से पहले होने वाले मुशायरे, तो उनको अगर हम आजकल के मुशायरों से कंपेयर करें, जैसे जश्न रेख्ता के मौके पे होते हैं मुशायरे, तो इन दोनों में आपको काफ़ी फ़र्क महसूस होगा। तो इसी तरह फ्यूचर में जो मुशायरे होंगे उनमें भी मौजूदा मुशायरों के मुकाबले में काफ़ी नुमायाँ आपको तब्दीलियाँ नज़र आएंगी। तो ये एक डायनामिक इंस्टीट्यूशन है और ये ख़त्म नहीं होगा, बल्कि ये जारी रहेगा और मुख्तलिफ सूरतों में इवॉल्व होगा। और
सॉरी
थैंक यू।
मुझे
प्लीज प्रोफेसर रहमान एंड देन यू कैन।
जी मुझे इत्तेफाक है आप जो फरमा रहे थे मुअज्जम साहब। बस एक बात इसमें ऐड ये करूंगा कि कोई value judgment I would not like to give.
Please add in English.
Okay, I would not like to give any kind of or offer any kind of a value judgment that the earlier Mushairas were classical and very good and these ones are not good today, because the question that you posed, Rafat Saab, is and that how do you rate the online or the virtual Mushaira plus the Mushaira on the stage, person to person? The world has changed a lot because we don't have, as I said in the beginning in the introductory remark, that we don't have the same kind of ambience that we earlier had. But you would see that the modern Mushaira, on the stage Mushaira, suffers from too many things. For example, one thing which really is very jarring to me. First, earlier used to appreciate a poet or a poem because it is a cause of literary nourishment. So you used to say, wah, wah. What do you do now? Clap. This is the ugliest thing you can do for a sher. This is the ugliest thing you can think of a sher. You don't clap on a sher. So this is one thing. The other thing is that whole etiquette has changed. So that's why I said I don't want to make any kind of a value judgment that this is good or that was good and this is bad. But another very disappointing thing is that this is no longer a source for literary nourishment. Today's poet is is looking for your claps by cracking a joke in his share or making a smart statement in his share or trying to inflame your imagination in whatever way. It can be sometimes very raqiq as well. I'm using that word raqiq as well. But it gains in popularity and thousands of people clap on that and really appreciate that. But there is no replacement for the... I mentioned in the beginning to the 4 schools or the Bistan, as you say, 4 schools. Mushairas of Delhi is one kind of a situation. Mushairas of Lucknow were another kind of it. That is another cup of tea. And then of Rampur, historically so very significant, and of Azimabad, as you know. These are the 4 great centers. The very important point that Professor Zaidi was trying to make is this, that we started with the idea of Mushaira, but we also started thinking of the cities in terms of Mushaira. And that was the quality of this presentation, that Mushaira and the city, both of them taken together. I was only concentrating on the kind of Mushairas that we have had in the past and what we are going to have. So I'm not disappointed by saying that these virtual Mushairas are not very good, and because there are lots of poets who do not really know. There are some celebrities, I would not like to name, that would not be very proper, who are just not aware of the scheme, the Bahar, and they're very celebrated ones.
Yeah.
Top ranking.
That is kind of a performance now. And Professor Nasreen.
Yes, sir. Sir, the question that was brought up about science while we were having this talk on Mushaira is an indicator that the direction is going to change. Because you see, there was a serious concern, and to locate science into this discourse, those questions were difficult, and that is an indicator. The other thing is that these kind of things came up when there was a room for something which was entertaining. Now we have so many other things which fill up the space of entertainment. So one important thing is that in which way will the work-life balance go? Because if people don't have time, then things like this are actually eventually going to kind of be phased out. That is seriously a threat. And the other thing is that for entertainment, what are the other options which are available? Because the times that we were talking about a while ago were times when this was the entertainment. Now we have a lot of choices to choose from. So I think that's also going to make a difference. Thank you.
That was just not entertainment. That was literary nourishment. Entertainment was a subsidiary to that. That was not the principal aim.
But for some of them, it was a mixture of both. Not just, maybe a literary nourishment, as you say.
Today, you don't have literary nourishment. You only have catering to the taste. This is what is happening today. There is no literary nourishment now.
Thank you. So maybe Professor Ravi Sana is ready for science and poetry session.
Rafat Sahab, before that, I would like to, with apologies to Professor Zaidi, I would like to get back to the question about, things that are being deleted from the textbooks. I think the question is not that, whether textbooks are to be cut down or not. I think India is going through very disturbing times, and the competitive electoral politics has brought to the surface very bad effects of fault lines that lie in our society. And the kind of difficult times that we are going through, that is related to what is being done to the textbooks, what is being done to the political discourse, what is being done to many, many other things. Today itself in Delhi, we had a half-day meeting organized by Anhad, where many eminent people spoke, and there is no clear solution, no easy solution to the problems that we are going through. And the textbook deletion, or trying to delete Mughal history, or trying to show that those who are considered as victors actually they were the losers, and those who were the losers, they were the victors, turning history upside down. These are not related to issues of textbook alone. Textbooks can be changed properly anytime, but this is not being done in order to streamline the textbook or reduce the burden on the students. So I mean, I just couldn't help bringing this up because otherwise it will leave, this is a global audience, it will leave an impression as if it is a question of textbooks. This is much deeper than that.
Thank you so much.
Sir, we are not far from the day where we will be told that Savarkar killed Babur.
Okay,
I don't think, I don't think it is fair to say all these things because, in the life of a country, changes keep happening. You're saying India is going through a very difficult time. The same thing we were saying in 1977 when we had emergency. So, we said this in 47, we said this in 77, we're saying this now. When did it was India not?
Thank you, Professor Zaidi. We are not going into politics. So thank you so much. And back to Razibai, I just wanted to apologize for my interference from my phone. Thank you so much. And back to Razibai.
Oh, well, Ravi Saab, we will have a session soon on this.
Science and poetry.
And, science and poetry. And of course, the complex question came because Ravi Sinha Saab is both. He is now a budding Urdu shair. But he is he's a nuclear physicist and an activist. So I think he's a mix of everything. I have a question. The question is about that era which you covered. The era, as some of us say, the era of decadency, or maybe at the same time cultural peak. Some people say that it's the zenith of culture and all those. For others, it is also an era of decadency where the entire community especially got lost into very feudal way of thinking and relaxed way of living, and which Ghalib also, after visiting Calcutta, realized there is another word there, and we cannot, or Sir Syed realized that we cannot possibly compete with a community which lives in a totally different domain. So was there any attempt, Professor Nishat, especially you or anybody else, was there any attempt during that era of decadency or conflict or transition by some intellectual quarters within the community or the larger Indian community to change the discourse of poetry, learning from the contents of Western poetry, which was certainly full of content and substance, than just the flowery language manipulation? Because if you go in our poetry, by the way, I'm also a little bit Urdu poet type thing, but I know the flowering of language is really is the dominant character rather than the substance of thoughts, which was so full, always full in the English literature, poetry, or some other poetries. But here, except Ghalib or maybe later course, of course, Iqbal. But look at Rabindranath Tagore's poetry. I mean, it's always full of substance. So was there any attempt by Urdu poets, whether from any community at that time?
Yes, I think
change the discourse of this to a substantive, content.
Yeah. Thank you, Raziza, for this question. The discourse did begin to shift during Ghalib's own lifetime, and that is the reason why when Sir Syed Ahmad Khan wanted to publish his Aine Akbari, edited volume of Aine Akbari, and he requested Ghalib to write taqreers for that. Ghalib put a long Persian couplet that look at these tribes of England. They are running steamers. They have this, that, all these technological advancements, and here you are sitting and digging the past. So obviously that shows that discourse did begin to change, and we notice a more concrete realization of this shift in discourse in Hali. When Hali wrote his Musaddas, he's very critical, almost dismissive of this classical poetry, which revels only in, which is self-referential, revels only in the textuality, and he wants poetry to be purposive. He wants poetry to have a message, to address social issues and things like that. So the discourse did begin to shift, and that you notice, from the end of the century onwards, Hali onwards.
Thank you. Yeah. So
and then the progressive after that.
Yes.
And so there was also Sir Akbar Allahabadi, the Barke Kalisa. Where he writes about Bandhi hai tak taki qaum ki injan ki taraf, like you were talking about the scientific development. So he writes ki tak taki ban gayi hai qaum ki injan ki taraf, हम में बाकी नहीं अब खालिद शिराज का रंग, दिल पे गालिब है फकत हाफिज, हम पे अब है नहीं खालिद जाबाज का रंग, दिल पे गालिब है फकत हाफिज शिराज का रंग. And in the end he says कि मेरे इस्लाम को किस्सा माजी समझो, नाम ही नाम है वरना मैं मुसलमान नहीं, मेरे नाम को किस्सा माजी समझो.
Yeah, of course. But the real change really came with the
progressives.
Yeah. That was a shining moment, but then they themselves got into what you call the corrupt blindness of ideology. That also was not really the way it started and the way it became into the trap. But anyway, it was so nice.
रज़ी साहब एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग नज्म का उन्वान बता दें आपको. ये शायद नज्म है इस्माइल मेरठी की, अच्छा जमाना आने वाला है. पढ़िएगा इस नज्म को.
जी.
It rings certain bells in your mind. अच्छा जमाना, हर बंद के बाद ये मिसरा आता है. अच्छा जमाना
भी आ रहा है, अच्छा जमाना आने वाला है. We live in that.
Okay, thank you everyone. It was an excellent session, and thank you everyone for their input and the comments and questions. Beautiful.
Very wonderful session. And this video will be released based on Faisal's preoccupation, how soon he can put it. Usually within a week time he puts it. And he's a very busy guy, but we all depend on his expertise. It will be soon coming, I think, within a week. So thank you all. 2 hours, more than 2 hours.
Yeah, thank you all the speakers. Thank you.
Not on the coming Saturday, and we will see you on 29th with Nishat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All. Bye.
बहुत शुक्रिया तुम्हारा.
Advance